Sometimes the most successful people are the most disconnected from real talent. Alexandria Romano had built a culinary empire worth $500 million, but when she publicly bet that a humble single father couldn't cook for 100 people, she discovered that all her Michelin stars meant nothing compared to genuine passion and skill. Her luxury restaurant chain was failing. Her celebrity chefs were more concerned with social media than soul food. With her company's reputation crumbling and investors pulling out, Alexandria was about to learn that the most extraordinary culinary talent often comes from the most unexpected places. That's when she encountered Henry Diaz, a single father working double shifts as a hospital janitor while raising his 8-year-old daughter Emma alone. He had no formal culinary training, just 20 years of cooking with love, creativity, and the kind of resourcefulness that only comes from making magic happen on a shoestring budget. Before we dive into this incredible journey, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale will absolutely amaze you. At 34, Alexandria Romano commanded the culinary world from her glass-walled penthouse office overlooking downtown Portland's vibrant food scene. Her empire, Romano Culinary Group, owned 15 upscale restaurants across the Pacific Northwest, each bearing her signature minimalist aesthetic and sky-high prices that only the city's elite could afford. Alexandria had built her reputation on 3 unwavering principles: presentation over everything, exclusivity breeds desire, and never compromise on profit margins. Her restaurants were temples to expensive ingredients and Instagram-worthy plating, where a single appetizer cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. The irony was crushing. While her restaurants earned critical acclaim and celebrity clientele, her connection to actual food had withered somewhere between business school and her first IPO filing. She hadn't cooked a meal herself in over 5 years, relying instead on a team of temperamental head chefs who treated creativity like a proprietary secret and innovation like a corporate buzzword. Her corner office was a monument to success. James Beard Award replicas lined one wall, magazine covers featuring her perfectly styled face adorned another, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of a city she barely experienced beyond boardrooms and investor meetings. But Alexandria rarely noticed the bustling food trucks below or the family-owned restaurants that had been serving the community for generations. Success had a way of elevating you so high above street level that you forgot what authentic flavor actually tasted like. The crisis began with a scathing review in Portland Food and Wine magazine that sent shockwaves through her carefully constructed world. Renowned food critic Jonathan Hartwell had published a devastating piece titled "The Emptiness of Excellence: When Fine Dining Loses Its Soul." The review didn't just critique her restaurants, it exposed them as soulless profit machines disguised as culinary art. Romano's establishments represent everything wrong with modern fine dining, Hartwell had written. Technically proficient but emotionally vacant. Beautiful presentations hiding the absence of any genuine passion or connection to the food's cultural roots. These restaurants serve ego, not sustenance. But the review's most damaging line was yet to come. "I've had more memorable meals from food trucks and community kitchens than from any Romano establishment. Perhaps Ms. Romano should spend less time counting profits and more time remembering why people actually cook. To nourish souls, not stock portfolios." The article went viral within hours. Food bloggers shared it across social media platforms. Competing restaurants, staff whispered about it in industry circles. Most devastating of all, 3 major investors scheduled emergency meetings to discuss, quote, concerns about brand direction and market positioning. Alexandria's assistant, Rebecca Torres, knocked tentatively on her office door that Tuesday morning, carrying a tablet loaded with damage control strategies and a stack of printed reviews from food industry publications. "Ma'am, we need to discuss the response strategy. The marketing team has prepared several options for addressing the criticism." Alexandria set down her imported French roast coffee, a $200 per pound blend that she'd never actually tasted without thinking about its cost per cup, and studied the media analysis Rebecca had prepared. Every metric was trending downward: social media sentiment, reservation numbers, investor confidence ratings. "What's our biggest vulnerability?" Alexandria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The authenticity question," Rebecca replied carefully. The review resonated because it echoed complaints we've been hearing from customers for months. People are saying our food is technically perfect but emotionally empty. They want connection, story, tradition, things that are harder to quantify in a profit and loss statement. Alexandria's jaw tightened as she processed this feedback. She'd spent years perfecting systems, optimizing operations, and maximizing profit margins. Her restaurants ran like Swiss watches, efficient, precise, predictable. Every plate that left her kitchens met exacting standards for presentation, portion control, and cost management. But somewhere in her pursuit of operational excellence, she'd lost something that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or efficiency metrics. Her food had become beautiful, expensive, and completely forgettable. The morning's crisis deepened when her head chef at the flagship Romano's downtown location called with news that would test every assumption Alexandria had built her empire upon. "Ms. Romano, we have a situation." Chef Marcus Beaumont's voice carried the kind of panic that usually preceded kitchen disasters. "The Johnson wedding reception for Saturday. They're requesting a complete menu change. They want authentic comfort food with soul, not our signature molecular gastronomy presentation." Alexandria felt her stomach clench. The Johnson wedding represented more than just a $50,000 catering contract. It was a showcase event where Portland's most influential food enthusiasts would gather. Food bloggers, restaurant owners, and culinary school instructors would all be sampling her cuisine and sharing their opinions across social media platforms. "Give them what they want," she said, though even as the words left her mouth she realized the problem. Her chefs were trained in precision techniques and expensive ingredients. They could create edible art that photographed beautifully and commanded premium prices, but could they cook the kind of food that made people close their eyes and remember their grandmother's kitchen? "Ma'am, with respect, our team specializes in elevated cuisine. We're not equipped for rustic cooking," Chef Beaumont replied, his tone suggesting that rustic was barely a step above prison food. Alexandria stared out her office window at the food trucks lining the street below, suddenly wondering when she'd started thinking that authentic meant inferior. When had she convinced herself that food needed to be expensive and complicated to be excellent? Her phone buzzed with a text message from her business partner and former culinary school classmate, Victoria Chen. "Saw the review. Board meeting moved to Thursday. They're asking hard questions about our market position and whether we're still relevant to modern diners." The text hit Alexandria like ice water. She'd spent 8 years building Romano Culinary Group from a single restaurant into a regional empire. Her personal net worth was tied entirely to the company's success, and her reputation in the culinary world depended on maintaining the illusion that she was still connected to the craft that had originally inspired her to cook. But as she sat in her climate-controlled office, surrounded by awards and accolades that felt increasingly hollow, Alexandria realized she faced a crisis that couldn't be solved with better marketing or operational efficiency. She'd built a business empire, but lost her culinary soul in the process. The Johnson wedding had become more than just another catering contract. It was a test of whether Alexandria Romano still understood what great food actually meant, or if she'd become so focused on profit margins that she'd forgotten why people fell in love with cooking in the first place. Entran. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The call that would shatter Alexandria Romano's world came at 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday that began like any other power lunch meeting. She was reviewing quarterly profit projections when her assistant Rebecca burst through her office door with an expression that meant only one thing: complete disaster. "Ms. Romano, we have a catastrophic situation with the Johnson wedding," Rebecca announced, her usually composed demeanor cracking under pressure. "Chef Beaumont just quit, along with his entire sous chef team." Alexandria's imported crystal water glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor of her penthouse office. The Johnson wedding was in exactly 72 hours. 150 of Portland's most influential food enthusiasts would be expecting a culinary experience that could either resurrect her reputation or bury it permanently. "Define quit," Alexandria said, though her stomach was already plummeting toward her designer shoes. He said, and I quote, "I refuse to compromise my artistic integrity by cooking peasant food for people who wouldn't recognize real cuisine if it came with a Michelin star," Rebecca read from her hastily scribbled notes. "He's taken a position with Cascade Heights Resort, effective immediately." Alexandria stared at the city skyline, watching food trucks serve lunch to office workers who seemed genuinely happy with their simple, unpretentious meals. The irony was suffocating. Her Michelin-starred chef had abandoned her because she'd asked him to cook the kind of food that actually brought people joy. "What about our backup catering team?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would only deepen her crisis. "That's the other problem," Rebecca continued. "Word spreads fast in Portland's culinary community. 3 other catering companies have declined to take the contract. They're saying the timeline is impossible and the expectations are unrealistic." Alexandria felt her carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble in real time. The Johnson wedding wasn't just another event. It was her chance to prove that Romano Culinary Group could evolve, could reconnect with authentic flavors, could remember what had made her fall in love with cooking in the first place. "There has to be someone," Alexandria said, more to herself than to Rebecca. "Call every culinary school, every freelance chef, every—" "I've already tried," Rebecca interrupted gently. "Portland Culinary Institute can't provide enough students. The freelance chefs who are available, well, their portfolios don't exactly match your standards." Alexandria's phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Johnson, the bride whose wedding had become the epicenter of her professional crisis. "Alexandria, just confirming everything is perfect for Saturday. My grandmother's recipes mean everything to our family. Can't wait to taste your team's interpretation of authentic comfort food." The message felt like a knife twisting in Alexandria's chest. Patricia Johnson wasn't asking for molecular gastronomy or Instagram-worthy presentations. She wanted food that told stories, that connected generations, that made people feel loved rather than impressed. Alexandria had built a $500 million empire on the premise that expensive and complicated equaled excellent. But Patricia Johnson was asking for something far more challenging: food with soul. "Ms. Romano," Rebecca said carefully, "there might be one option. It's unconventional." Alexandria looked up from Patricia's text message, desperate enough to consider anything. "I'm listening." "The catering company that handles our corporate lunch orders, Simple Meals Catering, they're suggesting we partner with some local community cooks. People who specialize in authentic, traditional cooking." Alexandria raised an eyebrow. Simple Meals Catering was the budget option she used for employee lunches and board meetings, where presentation mattered less than keeping costs down. "You want me to trust a $50,000 contract to lunch caterers?" "Not exactly," Rebecca said, pulling out her tablet and navigating to a local food blog. "There's this article about Portland's hidden culinary gems. People who aren't professional chefs but create extraordinary food. Look at this." Rebecca showed Alexandria a blog post titled, "The Janitor Who Cooks Better Than James Beard Winners." The featured photo showed a simple plate of what appeared to be elevated comfort food: perfectly golden fried chicken, alongside creamy mac and cheese and collard greens that seemed to glow with flavor. "This is Henry Diaz," Rebecca explained. "He works as a hospital janitor at Portland General, but he's been cooking for community events, church fundraisers, and neighborhood gatherings for years. People drive across town just to taste his food." Alexandria studied the photos in the blog post. The plating wasn't sophisticated by her standards. No microgreens, no artistic sauce drizzles, no expensive garnishes. But something about the food looked alive, real, like it had been prepared by someone who understood that cooking was about nourishing people, not impressing them. "A janitor," Alexandria said slowly. "You want me to entrust my company's reputation to a hospital janitor?" The article quotes a food critic from the Portland Tribune, Rebecca continued, reading from her tablet. "Henry Diaz doesn't just cook food, he creates experiences that transport you back to your childhood, to family gatherings, to moments when eating was about connection rather than consumption. His fried chicken rivals anything served in the city's most expensive restaurants, and his sides are pure poetry." Alexandria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine curiosity about someone else's cooking. When had she last eaten food that transported her anywhere beyond thinking about profit margins and operational efficiency? "There's more," Rebecca said, scrolling through the article. "He's apparently single-handedly catered a community fundraiser for 200 people last month. All by himself. The event raised $30,000 for local families in need." 200 people, Alexandria repeated. The logistics alone seemed impossible for one person, especially someone without professional kitchen equipment or a trained staff. And here's the interesting part, Rebecca continued. He doesn't accept payment. He only asks that people make donations to community causes. The article says he's been doing this for 15 years, ever since his wife died and he started raising his daughter alone. Alexandria stared at the simple photo of Henry's food, feeling something crack open inside her chest. This man was cooking the way she had dreamed of cooking when she first fell in love with the culinary arts, not for profit or recognition, but because food was a language of love and care. "Where does he live?" Alexandria asked. "Southeast Portland." The article mentions he's been cooking out of his home kitchen for most community events. Rebecca paused. "Ms. Romano, I should mention that Simple Meals Catering says he's particular about what events he'll help with. He apparently turned down a request from Cascade Heights Resort because he said they didn't understand what real food was about." Alexandria felt her pride bristle. Cascade Heights Resort. The same place that had just hired her former head chef. If Henry Diaz had rejected their offer, what made Rebecca think he'd be interested in helping Romano Culinary Group? "What exactly are you suggesting?" Alexandria asked. "I think," Rebecca said carefully, "you should meet with him, see if he'd be willing to collaborate on the Johnson wedding. Maybe learn something about the kind of cooking that actually moves people." Alexandria looked out her office window at the food trucks below, then back at the photos of Henry's simple, soulful cooking. Her entire career had been built on the assumption that her culinary education, her business acumen, and her sophisticated palate made her superior to amateur cooks. But as she faced the very real possibility of professional humiliation in front of Portland's entire culinary community, Alexandria realized she might need to swallow her pride and ask for help from someone who had never forgotten why cooking mattered in the first place. The Johnson wedding was in 72 hours. Her reputation hung in the balance. And her only hope might be a single father working as a hospital janitor who somehow understood food in ways her Michelin-starred chefs never had. "Set up the meeting," Alexandria said quietly. "But Rebecca, this cannot get out to the press. If word spreads that Romano Culinary Group needs help from someone without formal training." "I understand," Rebecca replied. "Your reputation is safe with me." But as Alexandria stared at the photos of Henry Diaz's cooking, she wondered if her reputation was worth protecting if it was built on such a fragile foundation. Maybe it was time to discover what happened when culinary excellence met authentic passion. Maybe it was time to learn whether a hospital janitor could teach a restaurant empire owner something about what great food really meant. The ride to Henry Diaz's Southeast Portland neighborhood took Alexandria through a part of the city she'd never experienced. Her black Tesla Model S hummed quietly through streets lined with modest single-family homes, corner markets with hand-painted signs, and community gardens where families tended vegetables together on Saturday afternoons. Alexandria had instructed her driver to wait in the car, partly for security, but mostly because she didn't want to be seen in this working-class neighborhood by anyone who might recognize her from food industry publications. Her reputation for exclusivity and sophistication would suffer if word got out that she was desperately seeking help from an amateur cook. Henry's house sat on Maple Street, a narrow road dotted with small homes that showed the kind of careful maintenance that comes from pride rather than wealth. The yard was immaculate despite its modest size, with a vegetable garden that revealed tomatoes, herbs, and peppers thriving under Henry's attention. A child's bicycle leaned against the front porch, and the sound of laughter drifted from somewhere behind the house. Alexandria checked her reflection in her phone's camera before approaching the front door. Her designer blazer and silk blouse felt simultaneously overdressed and like armor against the vulnerability she was about to expose. When had she last asked anyone for help with cooking? The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a man in his mid-30s with calloused hands, kind eyes, and the solid build of someone who worked physically demanding jobs. Henry Diaz wore simple jeans and a faded Portland Timbers t-shirt, but his smile was warm and genuine in a way that immediately made Alexandria feel both welcome and acutely aware of her own defensive posture. "Ms. Romano," Henry said, extending his hand with the same natural courtesy Alexandria had seen in his daughter's interaction with Rebecca during the phone scheduling. "Thank you for coming to my neighborhood. I hope you didn't have trouble finding the house." When Alexandria shook his hand, she noticed the same thing she'd observed about every truly talented chef she'd ever worked with. His hands were tools, scarred from years of cooking but gentle and precise in their movements. "Mr. Diaz, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me," Alexandria replied, following him into a living room that was small but immaculately clean. The space was decorated with family photos, children's artwork, and cooking magazines that looked well-read rather than decorative. "Please, call me Henry," he said, gesturing toward a comfortable but worn sofa. "Can I offer you something to drink? I've got fresh iced tea, coffee, or my daughter Emma makes a mean lemonade if you're feeling adventurous." Alexandria paused, realizing she couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her homemade anything. "Iced tea would be lovely, thank you." As Henry disappeared into the kitchen, Alexandria studied the living room with growing curiosity. The space told stories. Photos of Henry and a young girl at community events, certificates of appreciation from local charities, and a small bookshelf filled with cookbooks that ranged from Julia Child classics to contemporary works on soul food and regional American cuisine. One photo particularly caught her attention: Henry standing behind a massive outdoor grill serving food to what appeared to be hundreds of people at some kind of community festival. He was laughing, his apron stained with the evidence of serious cooking, surrounded by families who looked genuinely happy to be eating his food. "That was last year's Neighborhood Unity Festival," Henry said, returning with 2 glasses of iced tea that smelled like real tea leaves and fresh mint. "We raised money for 3 families who lost their homes in the apartment fire on Division Street." Alexandria accepted the tea and was surprised by its complexity. Not just sweet, but layered with subtle flavors that spoke of someone who paid attention to details even in simple preparations. "How many people did you cook for?" "About 400, Henry replied casually, as if feeding 400 people was a normal weekend activity. "My daughter Emma helped with the prep work. She's getting pretty good with knife skills, though I still supervise anything involving sharp objects." 400 people. Alexandria's most expensive restaurants rarely served more than 200 customers on their busiest nights. And that was with teams of professionally trained chefs, industrial kitchen equipment, and months of planning. "Henry," Alexandria began, setting down her tea and trying to find the right approach, "I'm going to be completely honest with you about why I'm here." Henry nodded, his expression attentive but not pushy. Alexandria had the distinct impression that he was someone who listened more than he spoke, who observed before he judged. "My company is facing a crisis," she continued. "We have a wedding reception tomorrow night for 150 people, and my head chef quit yesterday along with his entire team. The client specifically requested authentic comfort food, the kind of cooking that connects people to family traditions rather than impressing them with technique." Henry's expression didn't change, but Alexandria noticed his hands resting calmly on his knees. No fidgeting, no anxiety, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what authentic comfort food meant. "The thing is," Alexandria continued, feeling her pride struggling against her desperation, "I've built my career on high-end cuisine, molecular gastronomy, exotic ingredients, presentations that photograph beautifully for social media. But I'm realizing that somewhere along the way, I lost touch with the kind of cooking that actually nourishes people's souls." "What kind of food is the bride hoping for?" Henry asked. Alexandria pulled out her phone and read from Patricia Johnson's original email. "She wants dishes that taste like childhood memories, food that brings families together, recipes that tell stories about love and tradition." She specifically mentioned wanting her grandmother's style of cooking: fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread that tastes like it was made with care rather than efficiency. Henry smiled, and Alexandria caught something in his expression that she recognized from her own early days in culinary school, the look of someone who understood food as a language of love rather than a business opportunity. "Those are some of my favorite dishes to prepare," Henry said. "There's something special about food that connects people to their roots, that makes them feel cared for rather than just fed." "The problem," Alexandria admitted, "is that I don't know how to cook that way anymore. My training is all about precision, consistency, cost control. I can create dishes that look perfect and cost appropriately for high-end establishments, but I'm not sure I remember how to cook food that actually moves people emotionally." Henry was quiet for a moment, considering her words with the same thoughtful attention he probably gave to developing recipes. "Ms. Romano, Alexandria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you first started cooking, before the business side took over, what made you fall in love with food?" The question hit Alexandria like a physical blow. When had she last thought about her original motivation for cooking? She remembered being 12 years old, standing on a step stool in her grandmother's kitchen, learning to make pasta sauce from tomatoes they'd grown in the backyard garden. The smell of garlic and basil, the satisfaction of creating something that made her family smile, the way food had seemed like magic. "I wanted to make people happy," Alexandria said quietly. "I wanted to create experiences that brought families together, that made ordinary Tuesday nights feel special." "That's exactly what comfort food is about," Henry replied. "It's not about complexity or expense. It's about understanding that every dish is an opportunity to show people they matter, that someone cared enough to put love into their meal." Alexandria felt something loosening in her chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for years. "Henry, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that I understand how presumptuous this sounds." Henry waited patiently, his expression open and non-judgmental. "Would you be willing to help me with this wedding reception? I know you don't know me, and I know my company probably represents everything you think is wrong with the food industry. But I'm asking not as a successful restaurateur, I'm asking as someone who's lost her way and needs help remembering what great cooking actually means." Henry considered her request for what felt like an eternity. Alexandria found herself holding her breath, realizing that her entire professional future might depend on the decision of a man she'd met 30 minutes ago. "Can I ask you something?" Henry said finally. "Anything. If I help you with this wedding, what happens afterward? Do you go back to your high-end restaurants and forget about this conversation? Or are you genuinely interested in changing how your company approaches food?" The question forced Alexandria to confront something she'd been avoiding since Jonathan Hartwell's devastating review. Was she looking for a quick fix to her immediate crisis, or was she ready to fundamentally reconsider everything she'd built her career on? "I honestly don't know," Alexandria admitted, "but I do know that I can't continue running restaurants that serve beautiful, expensive food that nobody remembers eating. I want to rediscover what made me love cooking in the first place." Henry smiled, the expression of someone who recognized authentic vulnerability when he heard it. "All right, Alexandria, I'll help you with this wedding, but I have some conditions." "Name them." "First, we cook together. This isn't about me doing the work while you take credit. If you want to reconnect with authentic cooking, you need to get your hands dirty." Alexandria nodded, feeling both terrified and excited at the prospect of actually cooking again. "Second, we do this my way. No shortcuts, no cost-cutting, no compromising on quality for the sake of profit margins. We cook food that honors the bride's family traditions." "Agreed." "And third," Henry said, his expression becoming more serious, "if this works, if we create something beautiful together, I want you to promise me that you'll consider how you might bring this approach to your other restaurants. Not necessarily the same menu, but the same philosophy. Food as connection rather than commodity." Alexandria extended her hand to shake on their agreement, but Henry had one more surprise for her. "There's actually a fourth condition," he said with a grin. "You have to let my daughter Emma help with the prep work. She's been cooking with me since she was 6, and she has some strong opinions about mac and cheese that you're going to want to hear." As they shook hands, Alexandria realized she was about to embark on the most important cooking lesson of her career. And it was going to be taught by a hospital janitor and his 8-year-old daughter in a modest kitchen in Southeast Portland. The morning of the Johnson wedding dawned with the kind of pressure that transforms seasoned professionals into nervous wrecks. Alexandria arrived at Henry's house at 6 a.m., her usual designer attire replaced by practical jeans and a plain white t-shirt that felt foreign against her skin. She'd barely slept, consumed by the realization that in 12 hours, she would either salvage her reputation or watch it crumble in front of Portland's entire culinary elite. Henry's kitchen was a revelation that shattered every assumption Alexandria had built about what constituted a professional cooking space. The room was barely larger than the walk-in closet in her penthouse, with standard residential appliances that belonged in a 1990s home improvement catalog rather than a serious culinary operation. Yet every surface gleamed with meticulous care, and the organization spoke of someone who understood efficiency born from necessity rather than abundance. "Good morning," Henry said, already dressed in a well-worn apron that bore the evidence of countless community meals. "Emma's still sleeping, but she'll be down in an hour to start on the cornbread. She takes that responsibility very seriously." Alexandria surveyed the modest kitchen with growing panic. "Henry, I need to ask, How exactly are we planning to prepare food for 150 people in a space designed for a family of two? Henry smiled with the calm confidence of someone who had solved this problem many times before. Community cooking isn't about having the biggest kitchen. It's about understanding timing, organization, and making every square inch work for you. Plus, we've got backup. He led Alexandria through the back door into his small yard, where she discovered his secret weapon, a collection of outdoor cooking equipment that would make any barbecue enthusiast weep with envy. Multiple large grills, several camping stoves, industrial-sized pots, and a smoker that looked like it had been built by someone who understood the religious significance of properly cooked meat. "This is where the magic happens," Henry explained, gesturing toward his outdoor kitchen setup. "The fried chicken gets done in cast-iron pans over the outdoor burners. Better temperature control and more capacity than any indoor stovetop. The mac and cheese bakes in those Dutch ovens, and the collard greens simmer all day in that big pot over there." Alexandria stared at the setup with a mixture of admiration and terror. Her restaurants relied on state-of-the-art commercial equipment, precise temperature controls, and teams of trained professionals. Henry was proposing to feed 150 people using what essentially amounted to an elaborate camping setup. "Have you ever cooked for this many people using outdoor equipment?" Alexandria asked, trying to keep the doubt out of her voice. "Last month's church fundraiser was 230 people," Henry replied matter-of-factly. "The key is starting early and understanding that each dish has its own timeline. We're not trying to plate everything simultaneously like a restaurant service. We're creating a buffet where each dish reaches its peak flavor at exactly the right moment." The sound of small feet on stairs announced Emma's arrival. Henry's 8-year-old daughter appeared in the kitchen wearing pajamas decorated with cartoon chefs, and an expression of sleepy determination that reminded Alexandria of herself during culinary school finals. "Is this the lady who forgot how to cook with love?" Emma asked with the brutal honesty that only children can deliver without malice. Alexandria felt her cheeks burn, but Henry simply smiled. "Emma, this is Ms. Alexandria. She's going to help us cook for the wedding today, and we're going to help her remember some things she used to know about food." Emma studied Alexandria with the serious assessment of a chef evaluating a new line cook. "Can you make cornbread?" "I used to," Alexandria admitted, realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd made cornbread from scratch rather than ordering it from a supplier who specialized in artisanal baked goods. "Dad says cornbread is the foundation of any good comfort food meal," Emma announced, pulling a worn recipe card from a kitchen drawer. "My mom taught him this recipe before she died, and now I'm learning it. The secret is buttermilk and a little bit of honey, but not too much honey, because then it tastes like cake instead of cornbread." Alexandria accepted the recipe card with hands that trembled slightly. The paper was stained with years of use, covered in handwritten notes and modifications in different colored ink. This wasn't just a recipe. It was a family history written in measurements and techniques passed down through generations. "Emma's going to walk you through the cornbread while I start prep work for the chicken," Henry explained. Fair warning, she's a tougher teacher than most culinary school instructors. What followed was the most humbling cooking lesson of Alexandria's career. Emma guided her through the cornbread recipe with the patient authority of someone who had learned not just the ingredients, but the stories behind them. Every measurement came with explanation: why the buttermilk needed to be room temperature, how to tell when the batter was mixed just enough but not too much, the importance of preheating the cast iron pan so the cornbread would develop the proper crust. "Ms. Alexandria," Emma said as they worked, "Dad told me you cook for rich people in fancy restaurants. Do they ever smile when they eat your food?" The question stopped Alexandria mid-stir. When had she last seen genuine joy on a customer's face? Her restaurants were designed for Instagram posts and business meetings, places where the food served as backdrop for social positioning rather than genuine nourishment. "I'm not sure they do," Alexandria admitted. "That's sad," Emma replied with the matter-of-fact compassion of childhood. "Food should make people happy. That's the whole point." As the morning progressed, Alexandria found herself falling into a rhythm she hadn't experienced in years. Working alongside Henry and Emma, she began to understand the difference between cooking for profit and cooking for purpose. Every dish they prepared carried intention. The chicken seasoned with a blend of spices that Henry had perfected over 15 years of community cooking. The mac and cheese made with a combination of cheeses chosen for flavor rather than cost efficiency. The collard greens slow-cooked with smoked turkey and the kind of patience that couldn't be rushed. But by noon, as the scale of their undertaking became clear, Alexandria felt the familiar panic of a service spiraling toward disaster. They had prepared enough food for perhaps 50 people, but the wedding reception was expecting 150. The outdoor cooking setup, that had seemed charming in the morning, now looked woefully inadequate for the task ahead. "Henry," Alexandria said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice, "I don't think we're going to make it. We're running behind on every dish, and I can see at least 4 major bottlenecks in our timeline." Henry paused in his chicken seasoning, studying Alexandria's face with the same careful attention he gave to adjusting flavors. "What would you normally do in this situation at one of your restaurants?" "Call in backup staff, implement emergency protocols, possibly modify the menu to include dishes that can be prepared faster," Alexandria replied automatically. "And how would that food taste?" Alexandria considered the question honestly. Adequate, safe, probably unmemorable. "Right," Henry said, returning to his seasoning work. "So we have 2 choices. We can panic and create adequate food that meets the technical requirements, but misses the emotional point entirely. Or we can trust the process, accept that cooking for community sometimes means embracing controlled chaos, and focus on making food that people will remember for the right reasons." Alexandria watched Henry's hands as he worked, steady, confident, unhurried despite the ticking clock. His approach to the mounting pressure was completely opposite to everything she'd learned in professional kitchens, where speed and efficiency trumped everything else. "But what if we fail?" Alexandria asked. "What if we simply don't have enough food ready in time?" Emma looked up from the cornbread she was monitoring with scientific precision. "Dad says the only real failure in cooking is making food without caring about the people who eat it. Everything else is just problems that can be solved." As afternoon wore on, Alexandria discovered that Henry's calm confidence wasn't naive optimism. It was the result of years spent cooking under pressure with limited resources. When the first batch of fried chicken took longer than expected, he simply adjusted the timeline for other dishes. When they realized they needed more outdoor burner space, he improvised with equipment borrowed from neighbors who appeared with offers of help as naturally as if they'd been part of the plan all along. By 4 p.m., as guests would be arriving at the wedding venue in just 3 hours, Alexandria found herself covered in flour, smelling like smoke and spices, and experiencing a kind of panic she hadn't felt since her earliest days as a line cook. But alongside the panic was something else she hadn't experienced in years: the electric satisfaction of creating food that mattered. The moment of truth arrived when Henry handed her a spoon to taste the first batch of completed mac and cheese. The dish looked nothing like the sophisticated presentations her restaurants were known for. It was rustic, home-style, the kind of comfort food that would never photograph well for food magazines. But when Alexandria tasted it, she closed her eyes involuntarily. The flavors were complex yet familiar, sophisticated in their simplicity, the kind of food that bypassed the analytical part of her brain and spoke directly to memory and emotion. This wasn't just mac and cheese, it was comfort made edible, tradition translated into taste. "Oh," Alexandria said quietly, opening her eyes to find Henry and Emma watching her reaction. "Oh, this is food that makes people smile," Emma finished proudly. As the sun began to set over southeast Portland, Alexandria realized that, regardless of whether they successfully fed 150 wedding guests in the next few hours, she had already learned something that would change her approach to cooking forever. Henry Diaz had reminded her that the most important ingredient in any dish wasn't technique or expensive components, it was caring about the people who would eat what you created. The question now was whether that lesson would translate into actual success when Portland's culinary elite gathered to judge the most important meal of her career. By 5 p.m., with just 2 hours before the wedding reception's official start time, Alexandria found herself standing in the parking lot of Riverside Gardens Event Center, staring at a catering disaster that would have sent her former team into complete meltdown. Instead of the sleek refrigerated trucks and uniformed staff that typically delivered Romano Culinary Group events, she was looking at Henry's beat-up pickup truck, 2 borrowed minivans driven by neighbors she'd met only hours earlier, and a collection of mismatched coolers and insulated containers that looked like they belonged at a church potluck. The venue coordinator, Janet Morrison, approached with the kind of forced smile that event professionals reserve for situations spinning rapidly out of control. Janet had worked with Romano Culinary Group on dozens of high-end events, and her expression clearly indicated that Henry's unconventional setup was not what she'd been expecting. "Ms. Romano," Janet said carefully, "I need to discuss the service timeline. Your team doesn't appear to have the standard catering equipment I was expecting. Are you certain you'll be able to maintain proper food temperatures and presentation standards?" Alexandria glanced back at Henry, who was calmly directing his volunteer helpers in unloading containers of food that smelled absolutely incredible, but looked nothing like the sophisticated presentations Janet was accustomed to seeing from Romano events. Emma was carefully carrying a pan of cornbread that she'd refused to let anyone else transport, treating it with the reverence of someone carrying a family heirloom. "Janet," Alexandria said, feeling a strange calm settle over her despite the chaos surrounding them, "I need you to trust me on this. The food we're serving tonight might not look like what you're used to from my company, but I promise you it's going to be extraordinary." Janet's professional skepticism was written clearly across her face, but she nodded and retreated to handle the dozens of other details that made events run smoothly. Alexandria knew that Janet would be watching their setup carefully, ready to implement emergency protocols if Henry's unconventional approach proved inadequate for the upscale venue's standards. The Riverside Gardens Event Center was everything Alexandria's restaurants aspired to be: elegant, sophisticated, designed to impress rather than comfort. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over tables set with fine china and sterling silver flatware. The bride's family had spared no expense on decor, flowers, and ambiance that spoke of refined taste and substantial financial resources. Alexandria felt a moment of vertigo as she realized the disconnect between the venue's formal elegance and the rustic, home-style food they were about to serve. Had she made a catastrophic mistake? Would Patricia Johnson's wealthy guests be horrified by mac and cheese served in the same room where they expected molecular gastronomy and artistic presentations? "Second thoughts?" Henry asked quietly, appearing beside her with a container of collard greens that had been simmering all day and now filled the air with an aroma that seemed to transform the sterile elegance of the event space into something warmer and more inviting. "Honestly, yes," Alexandria admitted. "Look at this place, Henry. These people are expecting the kind of sophisticated cuisine that Romano Culinary Group is known for. What if they're disappointed? What if they think comfort food is beneath them?" Henry set down the container and studied the elegant dining room with the same thoughtful attention he gave to seasoning dishes. "You know what I learned cooking for community events? People might arrive with expectations, but they leave with feelings. The question isn't whether your food impresses them. It's whether it makes them feel cared for." Before Alexandria could respond, Patricia Johnson appeared in the doorway of the event space, radiant in her wedding dress and clearly eager to see how her grandmother's favorite dishes had been interpreted for her special day. Alexandria's stomach clenched with sudden panic. This was the moment when her career-defining gamble would either pay off spectacularly or destroy her reputation permanently. "Hey, Alexandria!" Patricia called out, her face glowing with excitement. "I've been smelling the most incredible aromas for the past 30 minutes. Please tell me you were able to create something special." Alexandria looked to Henry, who was already ladling a small portion of mac and cheese onto a china plate with the same care he'd shown throughout their entire collaboration. He handed the plate to Patricia with a warm smile that somehow managed to be both humble and confident. "We hope this honors your grandmother's memory," Henry said simply. Patricia took a bite, and Alexandria watched her expression transform in real time. The bride's eyes closed, her face softened, and when she opened them again, there were tears threatening to spill over onto her carefully applied makeup. "Oh my God," Patricia whispered. "This tastes exactly like I remember from Sunday dinners at Grandma's house. Where did you learn to cook like this?" Henry glanced at Alexandria, clearly giving her the opportunity to take credit for the success. Instead, Alexandria found herself saying, quote, "Patricia, I want you to meet Henry Diaz. He's the master chef who made today's magic possible. I was just fortunate enough to learn from him." What happened next challenged every assumption Alexandria had built about social dynamics and culinary hierarchy. Patricia Johnson, dressed in a wedding gown that probably cost more than Henry earned in 6 months, immediately embraced him with genuine warmth and gratitude. "Henry, thank you for understanding what this food means to our family," Patricia said. "My grandmother would have loved knowing that someone cared enough to cook with this much heart." Word of the exceptional food spread through the wedding reception with the speed that only accompanies truly memorable experiences. Alexandria watched in amazement as guests who had arrived expecting sophisticated presentations instead found themselves gathering around the buffet stations, talking animatedly about flavors that reminded them of childhood, family gatherings, and the kind of cooking that created memories rather than just satisfied hunger. The fried chicken was the first dish to disappear completely. Alexandria had watched Henry's technique during preparation, noting how he'd achieved the perfect balance of crispy exterior and juicy interior without any of the expensive equipment her restaurants relied on. Guests were returning for second and third pieces, something that never happened at Romano Culinary Group events where portions were carefully controlled and presentations prioritized over satisfaction. But it was the reaction to the collard greens that truly demonstrated Henry's mastery. Alexandria observed elderly guests taste the dish and immediately seek out Henry to share stories about their own family recipes and cooking traditions. Food had become a bridge for connection rather than simply fuel for a social event. Dr. Richard Sterling, a prominent food critic for Portland Monthly magazine, approached Alexandria during the height of the reception with an expression of genuine curiosity rather than his usual professional skepticism. "Alexandria," Dr. Sterling said, "I have to ask, what's different about tonight's menu? This food is completely unlike anything Romano Culinary Group has served before, but it's absolutely extraordinary. The flavors are sophisticated yet accessible, complex yet comforting. Who developed these recipes?" Alexandria felt the weight of the moment settling around her. She could claim credit for Henry's work, maintain the illusion that her company had simply evolved its approach to cuisine. Her business reputation would be preserved, her professional standing maintained. Instead, she found herself saying, "Dr. Sterling, I'd like you to meet the real architect of tonight's menu. Henry Diaz has taught me more about authentic cooking in one day than I learned in years of culinary school." Dr. Sterling extended his hand to Henry with the respect he typically reserved for celebrity chefs and James Beard Award winners. "Henry, I've been writing about food for 25 years, and tonight's meal is genuinely exceptional. The soul food influences combined with technical precision. It's masterful." Henry accepted the compliment with characteristic humility. "Thank you, Dr. Sterling. I just cooked the way my wife taught me, the way my community taught me. Food is about bringing people together." As the evening progressed, Alexandria realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in her career. Guests weren't just eating, they were experiencing genuine joy through food. Tables that had started the evening with polite conversation were now animated with laughter and shared stories prompted by dishes that evoked memories and emotions. The cornbread that Emma had supervised so carefully became the centerpiece of multiple conversations as guests complimented its perfect texture and subtle sweetness. Alexandria watched Henry's daughter accept praise from adults with the same gracious confidence she'd observed in her father, already understanding at age 8 that cooking for others was both a responsibility and a privilege. But the true revelation came when Alexandria overheard a conversation between two prominent restaurant owners who had been invited to the wedding. Instead of the usual industry gossip about profit margins and market positioning, they were discussing the emotional impact of the food, questioning their own approaches to hospitality and guest experience. "This is what we've been missing," one of them was saying. "We've become so focused on impressing people that we forgot about actually nourishing them." By 9 p.m., as the wedding reception reached its peak energy, Alexandria found herself standing beside Henry watching their collaborative success unfold. Every dish had been not just consumed, but celebrated. Guests were asking for recipes, sharing stories, and creating the kind of connections that only happen when food serves as a genuine expression of care rather than mere sustenance. "Henry," Alexandria said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Henry looked puzzled. "For what?" "For thinking that my culinary education and business success made me superior to someone who learned to cook from the heart. Tonight showed me that I've been confusing complexity with excellence, expense with quality." Henry smiled, the expression of someone who had never doubted that authentic cooking would eventually speak for itself. "Alexandria, you didn't need my help to be a great chef. You just needed permission to remember what great cooking actually means. As they watched Emma help clear tables with the same careful attention she'd brought to making cornbread, Alexandria realized that the evening had been about far more than saving a single catering contract. Henry Diaz had helped her rediscover the passion that had originally drawn her to cooking, the understanding that food was a language of love that transcended social boundaries and economic differences. The question now was whether this revelation would survive the return to her corporate responsibilities, or if the magic of this evening would fade like a beautiful dream that couldn't withstand the harsh light of business reality. The morning after the Johnson wedding, Alexandria sat in her penthouse office staring at voicemails, emails, and text messages that would have seemed impossible just 48 hours earlier. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since 7 a.m., with calls from food critics, event planners, and restaurant industry colleagues who had heard whispers about the remarkable transformation at Saturday night's reception. But it was the handwritten note from Patricia Johnson that sat prominently on her desk, its simple words carrying more weight than any professional review. Alexandria, thank you for giving us food that tasted like love. Our wedding guests are still talking about how your team created magic that honored our family's memory. Grandma would have been so proud. Rebecca knocked softly on her office door, carrying a stack of newspapers and printouts that Alexandria suspected would either vindicate or destroy everything she had risked the previous weekend. The reviews are in, Rebecca announced, her expression carefully neutral in a way that made Alexandria's stomach clench with anticipation. Dr. Richard Sterling's review in Portland Monthly was prominently displayed on top of the stack. Alexandria had worked with Sterling dozens of times over the years, and his evaluations could make or break restaurants throughout the Pacific Northwest. His writing was typically measured, analytical, focused on technical execution and presentation standards. But the headline made Alexandria's breath catch: Romano Culinary Group's stunning evolution when soul food meets sophisticated Pilates. Alexandria read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each paragraph. Saturday evening's Johnson wedding reception marked a dramatic departure for Romano Culinary Group, and the results were nothing short of revelatory. Executive chef Alexandria Romano has partnered with community cooking specialist Henry Diaz to create an experience that honors traditional comfort food while maintaining the excellence Romano's clients expect. The review continued with detailed descriptions of each dish, but what struck Alexandria most powerfully was Sterling's focus on the emotional impact rather than just technical execution. The mac and cheese achieved perfect texture and flavor balance, but more importantly, it created the kind of nostalgic connection that elevates food from mere sustenance to genuine nourishment. This is comfort food prepared with the skill of fine dining, but the heart of family cooking. Rebecca waited patiently as Alexandria absorbed the implications of Sterling's praise. There's more, Rebecca said gently. The Portland Tribune, Willamette Week, and 3 food blogs have all published similar reviews. But Alexandria, there's something else you need to see. Rebecca handed her a tablet displaying the Romano Culinary Group's social media accounts. The metrics were unlike anything Alexandria had ever witnessed. Hundreds of shares, comments, and direct messages from people who had either attended the wedding or heard about the food from guests. But it wasn't just the volume of responses that caught Alexandria's attention, it was the nature of the comments. Instead of the usual polite compliments about presentation and ambiance, people were sharing personal stories about family recipes, childhood memories triggered by the flavors, and requests for information about booking similar catering experiences. One comment particularly struck her: "My grandmother passed away last year, and I thought I'd never taste mac and cheese that reminded me of Sunday dinners at her house." Somehow, Romano's managed to capture not just the flavors, but the feeling of being truly cared for through food. Alexandria set down the tablet and walked to her office window, looking down at the food trucks and casual restaurants that had always seemed beneath her notice. "Rebecca, get Henry Diaz on the phone. I need to discuss something important with him." 20 minutes later, Alexandria found herself in an unprecedented position, asking someone without formal culinary training to consider a business partnership that would fundamentally alter her company's direction. "Henry," she said over the phone, "the reviews from Saturday night have been extraordinary. But more than that, I think we've discovered something that could change how people think about fine dining and comfort food." "I'm listening," Henry replied, though Alexandria could hear Emma chattering in the background about a school project that apparently involved volcanoes and baking soda. "I want to offer you a formal position with Romano Culinary Group. Not as a consultant or temporary helper, but as a partner in developing a new approach to hospitality that combines your understanding of community cooking with our operational capabilities. There was a long pause before Henry responded. Alexandria, I appreciate the offer, but I need to be honest with you. I've got responsibilities here. My job at the hospital, Emma's school schedule, community commitments that I can't abandon. Alexandria had anticipated this concern. What if we could structure something that worked around your existing responsibilities? Part-time collaboration, flexible scheduling, the ability to continue your community cooking while also helping us transform our restaurant operations? What exactly are you proposing? Henry asked. Alexandria took a deep breath, about to suggest something that would have seemed insane to her business-focused mindset just 1 week earlier. I want to open a new restaurant concept. Not another high-end establishment, but something that bridges the gap between fine dining and community cooking. A place where people come not just to eat, but to experience the kind of connection that food can create when it's prepared with genuine care. The silence on Henry's end stretched long enough that Alexandria wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of interest and caution. Tell me more about this restaurant concept. I'm imagining a space that feels like a community gathering place rather than an exclusive dining establishment, Alexandria explained, her excitement building as she articulated ideas that had been forming since Saturday night. Menu items based on traditional comfort food recipes, but prepared with the same attention to quality and technique that defines fine dining. Prices that make great food accessible to working families, not just corporate executives. And you think Portland is ready for something like this? Henry asked. Alexandria looked at the stack of overwhelmingly positive reviews on her desk, the social media comments from people hungry for authentic food experiences, and the voicemails from potential clients specifically requesting the kind of cooking you did at the Johnson wedding. Henry, I think Portland has been waiting for something like this. The response to Saturday night proves that people are craving food that nourishes their souls, not just their Instagram feeds. What Alexandria didn't mention was the conversation she'd had earlier that morning with her business partner, Victoria Chen, who had been less enthusiastic about departing from their proven profitable model. Alexandria, I understand you're excited about positive reviews, Victoria had said, but we have 15 existing restaurants that generate consistent revenue through our current approach. Are you really proposing we risk our established success to chase some idealistic vision of community cooking? The tension between financial pragmatism and authentic cooking had been building in Alexandria's mind since she'd returned to her corporate environment. Her office felt sterile and disconnected after spending time in Henry's kitchen, where every surface told stories about meals shared and families nourished. Henry, can I ask you something personal? Alexandria said. Of course. How do you balance the practical necessities of supporting your family with the desire to cook food that actually matters to people? I'm struggling with how to honor what we created together, while also running a business that pays salaries and rent. Henry's response came with the thoughtful consideration that Alexandria had come to recognize as his signature approach to complex questions. Alexandria, I don't think those things have to be in conflict. Some of the most successful community events I've cooked for have been fundraisers that generated significant money, while also serving food that brought people together. The key is remembering that profit should be the result of doing good work, not the primary motivation for it. The wisdom in Henry's words struck Alexandria with the force of recognition. She had spent years prioritizing profit margins over purpose, assuming that financial success and authentic cooking were mutually exclusive. But Saturday night had demonstrated that exceptional food, prepared with genuine care, could command both respect and revenue. Henry, would you be willing to visit one of my existing restaurants? Not to judge or criticize, but to help me understand how we might bridge the gap between what we do now and what we created together on Saturday. Which restaurant? Henry asked. Romano's downtown, our flagship location, the place where I built my reputation on molecular gastronomy and expensive presentations. Another pause, followed by what sounded like Emma offering commentary that Alexandria couldn't quite decipher. Emma wants to know if she can come too, Henry said with amusement in his voice. She's curious about what fancy restaurant food tastes like, and she has some opinions about whether expensive automatically means better. Alexandria found herself laughing for the first time since returning to her corporate responsibilities. Tell Emma she's absolutely invited. In fact, I think her perspective might be exactly what I need to understand how to move forward. As she hung up the phone and scheduled the restaurant visit for the following evening, Alexandria realized she was about to embark on the most challenging aspect of her transformation, figuring out how to integrate Henry's approach to cooking with the practical realities of running a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire. The question wasn't whether Saturday night's success could be replicated. The overwhelmingly positive response proved that Portland was hungry for authentic food experiences. The question was whether Alexandria had the courage to risk her established success in pursuit of something more meaningful, and whether Henry's community-focused approach could survive the transition into commercial restaurant operations. The reviews and social media response suggested that people were ready for a new kind of dining experience. But translating Saturday night's magic into a sustainable business model would require Alexandria to challenge every assumption she'd built her career on, starting with the visit to Romano's downtown that would force her to see her own restaurant through Henry and Emma's eyes. Tuesday evening at Romano's downtown brought together three people whose different relationships with food would expose everything Alexandria had built her empire on. She had reserved her usual corner table, the one that offered perfect views of both the open kitchen and the dining room's elegant atmosphere, but tonight she was seeing her flagship restaurant through completely foreign eyes. Henry arrived wearing his best collared shirt and clean jeans, the kind of careful attention to appearance that spoke of someone unaccustomed to dining establishments where appetizers cost $40. Emma walked beside him in a sundress that Alexandria suspected was her church outfit, her eyes wide as she took in the marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and uniformed servers who moved with choreographed precision through the dining room. "This is beautiful," Henry said as they were seated, his voice carrying genuine appreciation for the aesthetic Alexandria had spent years perfecting. "You can see why people would feel special eating here." Emma was less diplomatic. "Dad, why is it so quiet? Don't people talk when they eat?" Alexandria followed Emma's gaze around the dining room and noticed something she'd never observed before. Conversations were indeed muted, conducted in the hushed tones people used in museums or libraries. The atmosphere she'd designed to convey sophistication had apparently created an environment where joy felt inappropriate. Their server, Marcus, approached with the kind of polished professionalism that Alexandria trained her staff to embody. His recommendations were flawless, his knowledge of wine pairings encyclopedic, his presentation of the evening's specials delivered with the precision of someone who had memorized every detail about molecular gastronomy techniques and exotic ingredient sourcing. "What would you recommend for someone who's never eaten here before?" Henry asked, studying the menu with the concentration of someone translating a foreign language. Marcus launched into descriptions of signature dishes that Alexandria had perfected over years of fine-tuning. Deconstructed lobster bisque with saffron foam, wagyu beef with truffle reduction and microgreens, duck confit with pomegranate molasses and quinoa crisps. Each description emphasized technique, presentation, and the premium cost of ingredients. Emma listened to Marcus's recitation with growing confusion. "Excuse me," she interrupted with the fearless directness of childhood, "but what does any of that actually taste like? I mean, does the foam taste good, or is it just for decoration?" Marcus paused, clearly unprepared for a question that focused on flavor rather than prestige. "Well, the saffron foam adds visual interest and provides a textural contrast that enhances the overall dining experience." "But does it taste good?" Emma persisted. Alexandria watched Marcus struggle to answer a question that should have been fundamental but somehow felt revolutionary in the context of her restaurant's approach. When had her staff stopped thinking about whether food actually brought people pleasure? "Why don't we order a selection of dishes so you can experience the full range of our culinary offerings?" Alexandria suggested, partly to rescue Marcus from Emma's uncomfortably direct questioning. Over the next hour, Alexandria found herself seeing her restaurant's signature dishes through the eyes of people who approached food as nourishment rather than performance art. The presentation was undeniably stunning. Each plate arrived looking like a piece of modern sculpture, photographed enthusiastically by other diners for their social media accounts. But as Henry and Emma tasted each course, their reactions revealed truths that Alexandria had been avoiding for years. "This is really pretty," Emma said, studying the deconstructed lobster bisque, "but I can barely taste the lobster. Why did they make it so complicated?" Henry was more diplomatic but equally honest. "The technique is impressive, Alexandria. I can see the skill involved in creating these textures and presentations. But I'm having trouble connecting with the flavors emotionally. It feels more like an art exhibit than a meal. Alexandria tasted her own restaurant's food with fresh awareness, and Henry's observation hit her like physical pain. Every dish was technically perfect, visually stunning, and completely forgettable. The lobster bisque that cost $38 delivered less actual lobster flavor than the simple seafood stew Henry had served at community events for $12 per person. The duck confit arrived as an architectural arrangement of components that required Marcus to explain how diners should combine elements to achieve the intended flavor profile. Emma stared at the plate in bewilderment. "Why don't they just put it together the right way in the kitchen?" she asked. "If there's a right way to eat it, why make people guess?" Alexandria felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding of hospitality. When had she decided that making dining complicated was preferable to making it satisfying? Her restaurants had become elaborate puzzles that diners were expected to solve rather than experiences designed to bring them pleasure. Henry was working methodically through the duck course, clearly trying to appreciate the sophistication Alexandria was known for, but his expression remained politely neutral rather than genuinely enthusiastic. "Alexandria," he said carefully, "can I ask you something without sounding critical? Please, I want your honest opinion. Who are you cooking for here? Because this food feels designed to impress other chefs rather than nourish the people eating it." The question landed with devastating accuracy. Alexandria realized that her menus had indeed become exercises in demonstrating technical prowess to industry colleagues, rather than creating experiences that guests would remember fondly. She was cooking for food critics and culinary school textbooks, not for families celebrating anniversaries or friends gathering to connect over shared meals. "Emma, what do you think?" Alexandria asked, genuinely curious about the 8-year-old's unfiltered assessment. Emma had been quietly observing the dining room throughout their meal, and her response revealed observations that Alexandria's sophisticated palate had somehow missed. "The food is really fancy, but nobody here looks happy," Emma said with devastating honesty. "Like, people are taking pictures of their plates, but I haven't seen anyone smile while they're actually eating. At our community dinners, people laugh and tell stories, and sometimes they close their eyes when something tastes really good. Here, everyone looks like they're taking a test." Alexandria followed Emma's gaze around the dining room and saw her restaurant with completely new eyes. Diners were indeed treating their meals like examinations, carefully deconstructing dishes, analyzing presentations, discussing technique and ingredient sourcing. But genuine joy was notably absent from the experience. At a nearby table, a couple was celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary. They were photographing their food extensively, posting to social media, and engaging in the kind of sophisticated conversation about flavor profiles that Alexandria had always considered the mark of discerning diners. But they weren't actually connecting with each other or with their meal in any meaningful way. "Henry," Alexandria said quietly, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "I've spent 8 years building restaurants that serve my ego instead of serving people. I've confused complexity with excellence, expense with quality, sophistication with satisfaction." Henry considered her words with his characteristic thoughtfulness, while Emma attempted to eat the molecular gastronomy dessert that had arrived as what appeared to be edible geometry rather than recognizable food. "Alexandria, the mistake isn't that you learned these techniques or built this business. The mistake is thinking that technique and heart have to be mutually exclusive." "What do you mean?" "Look at that dessert Emma's struggling with. The technical skill involved in creating those textures and presentations is genuinely impressive. But what if you applied that same level of skill to creating a dessert that reminded people of their childhood or made them think about sharing sweets with people they love?" Alexandria watched Emma finally give up on the avant-garde dessert construction and simply lick the various components separately, clearly trying to find recognizable flavors among the artistic elements. "You're saying I should use my training and resources to elevate comfort food rather than create food that needs to be explained." "I'm saying maybe the question isn't whether to cook fancy food or simple food," Henry replied. "Maybe the question is whether you're cooking food that makes people feel cared for or food that makes them feel impressed." As they prepared to leave Romano's downtown, Alexandria realized that the evening had been more than just a restaurant visit. It had been a revelation about the fundamental purpose of hospitality. Her flagship restaurant was beautiful, technically proficient, and completely disconnected from the human experience of sharing meals. Emma's final observation, delivered with the brutal honesty that only children can provide, crystallized everything Alexandria had been struggling to understand. Ms. Alexandria, your restaurant is really pretty, but it doesn't feel like a place where families would want to eat together. It feels like a place where people go to prove their fancy. Walking to the parking garage after dinner, Alexandria found herself apologizing to Henry and Emma for subjecting them to an experience that had been more performance than nourishment. But Henry's response challenged her to think beyond simple categories of success and failure. Alexandria, tonight wasn't a waste of time. It showed us exactly what we're trying to transform. Your technical skills, your understanding of operations, your ability to create beautiful spaces, those are all valuable assets. The question now is whether you have the courage to use those assets in service of something more meaningful than impressing people. As Henry and Emma drove back to their modest neighborhood in southeast Portland, Alexandria remained in the parking garage, staring up at her flagship restaurant's elegant exterior lighting. She had built an empire that served beautiful, expensive food to people who felt obligated to pretend they enjoyed experiences designed more for social media than genuine satisfaction. The question that would determine her future was whether she could find a way to honor Henry's approach to cooking while maintaining the business success that employed dozens of people and supported her investors' expectations. Could she transform Romano Culinary Group from a collection of impressive restaurants into establishments that actually nourished the communities they served? The answer would require her to risk everything she had built in pursuit of something she was only beginning to understand: the difference between feeding people and truly caring for them through food. The following morning, Alexandria stood before the full staff of Romano's downtown during their mandatory monthly meeting, looking out at 43 employees who had built their careers on the sophisticated, high-end approach that had made her restaurants famous throughout Portland. Executive Chef Brandon Walsh sat in the front row with his characteristic confidence, surrounded by sous chefs who could execute molecular gastronomy techniques with surgical precision. What Alexandria was about to propose would challenge everything these professionals had been trained to value about fine dining, and she could already see skepticism in their expressions as she prepared to speak. "I want to talk about our future direction," Alexandria began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Last weekend's catering event has prompted me to reconsider our fundamental approach to hospitality and what we're trying to achieve through our food." Chef Walsh raised his hand with the kind of polite impatience that suggested he had better things to do than listen to philosophical discussions about restaurant operations. "Ms. Romano, if this is about cost-cutting measures or simplifying our menu offerings, I should mention that our current approach maintains the profit margins and critical recognition that distinguish us from casual dining establishments." Alexandria recognized the dismissive tone that her own management style had fostered over the years. The assumption that business discussions were separate from culinary artistry, that financial concerns shouldn't influence creative decisions. "Brandon, I'm not talking about cost-cutting. I'm talking about fundamentally reconsidering who we're cooking for and what we want our food to accomplish." Pastry chef Monica Santos shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Are you suggesting we abandon the techniques and presentations that have earned us James Beard nominations and featured coverage in Food and Wine magazine?" Alexandria looked around the room at faces that reflected years of training in the belief that complexity equaled excellence, that expensive ingredients justified premium pricing, that technical difficulty demonstrated superior skill. "I'm suggesting that maybe we've confused impressing people with satisfying them," Alexandria said. "Yesterday evening, I dined here with a community cook and his 8-year-old daughter. Their perspective made me realize that our food, while technically impressive, doesn't create the kind of emotional connection that great hospitality should provide." Head server Jennifer Martinez spoke up from the back of the room. "Ms. Romano, our customer satisfaction scores are consistently high. Our reviews praise both food quality and service standards. What specific problems are you trying to address?" Alexandria pulled out her phone and read from one of the social media comments that had been posted after the Johnson wedding. "Finally experienced food that made me feel cared for rather than just impressed. Romano's usual restaurants are beautiful, but this felt like someone actually wanted to nourish my soul." The room fell silent as staff processed the implicit criticism of their current approach. Alexandria could see defensive reactions forming, the natural response of professionals who had spent years perfecting skills that were apparently being questioned. "I'm not suggesting we abandon our training or lower our standards," Alexandria continued. I'm proposing that we redirect our expertise toward creating food that connects with people emotionally while maintaining the technical excellence we're known for. Sous chef Marcus Rivera raised his hand tentatively. What would that look like practically? Are you talking about changing our entire menu concept? Before Alexandria could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. Good luck with your staff meeting. Remember, you're not asking them to cook worse food. You're asking them to cook food that matters more. Alexandria realized that Henry had understood her anxiety about this conversation and offered exactly the perspective she needed to articulate her vision clearly. What I'm proposing, Alexandria said, is that we collaborate with Henry Diaz, the community cook who helped create Saturday's successful catering event, to develop a new approach that combines our technical skills with his understanding of food as emotional nourishment. Chef Walsh's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching alarm. You want to bring in someone without formal culinary training to, what exactly? Redesign our menu? Override our professional judgment? I want us to learn from someone who has never forgotten that cooking is about caring for people, Alexandria replied. Brandon, your knife skills and understanding of flavor profiles are exceptional. But when did you last create a dish that made someone think about their grandmother's kitchen or feel genuinely comforted rather than just impressed? The question hung in the air like a challenge that none of her staff had expected to face. Alexandria watched as several of her senior chefs exchanged glances that suggested she was having some kind of midlife crisis that would hopefully pass without disrupting their professional routines. Kitchen manager David Shen cleared his throat diplomatically. Ms. Romano, I think we all appreciate the value of authentic cooking traditions. But our clientele expects the kind of sophisticated dining experience that distinguishes us from family restaurants and casual establishments. Are you certain that moving toward simpler presentations won't damage our market position? Alexandria felt the weight of 8 years' worth of business decisions and professional relationships pressing against her desire to transform her approach to hospitality. Every person in this room depended on Romano Culinary Group for their livelihood, and she was essentially asking them to trust that abandoning their proven success formula wouldn't jeopardize their careers. David, I understand your concerns about market positioning, Alexandria said, but I want to share something with all of you. The response to Saturday's event has been unlike anything we've experienced. Food critics who have reviewed our restaurants dozens of times are calling it revolutionary. Event planners are requesting specifically the kind of cooking we did that night. We have a waiting list of people wanting to book similar catering experiences. She pulled out printouts of the reviews and social media responses, distributing them throughout the room. This isn't about lowering our standards or abandoning our skills. It's about applying those skills to create food that people remember for reasons beyond just technical execution. As staff members read the overwhelmingly positive responses to the Johnson wedding menu, Alexandria noticed subtle changes in their expressions. The defensive skepticism was giving way to professional curiosity about what had generated such enthusiastic reviews. Sous chef Patricia Lopez looked up from one of the articles. Ms. Romano, Dr. Sterling's review specifically mentions that the food maintains sophisticated technique while achieving emotional resonance. How exactly did you accomplish that combination? Alexandria realized this was her opportunity to demonstrate that Henry's approach wasn't about rejecting their professional training, but about redirecting it toward more meaningful purposes. Patricia, that's exactly what I want to explore with all of you. Henry Diaz understands flavors and techniques that aren't taught in culinary schools, not because they're inferior, but because they're focused on different goals. What if we combined his understanding of comfort food traditions with your mastery of modern culinary techniques? Chef Walsh leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine interest for the first time during the meeting. Are you talking about elevating traditional dishes using contemporary methods? Like applying our skills to perfecting classic comfort foods rather than creating original artistic presentations? That's exactly what I'm talking about, Alexandria said, feeling momentum building in the room. Imagine mac and cheese that achieves the same emotional impact as your grandmother's recipe, but executed with the precision and attention to detail that we bring to every dish we serve. Kitchen supervisor Lisa Park raised her hand. Would this be a complete menu overhaul, or are you thinking about introducing new offerings alongside our existing dishes? Alexandria took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine whether her staff embraced this transformation or began updating their resumes. I want to pilot a new restaurant concept. Same location, same team, but completely reimagined approach to hospitality. Henry has agreed to work with us to develop menu items that honor comfort food traditions while showcasing the technical skills that make this team exceptional. The room buzzed with conversations as staff members processed the implications of what Alexandria was proposing. She could see both excitement and anxiety in their faces. The recognition that this represented either an extraordinary opportunity or a potentially career-threatening risk. "When would this transition begin?" asked server manager Robert Kim. "Henry is coming in tomorrow evening for a collaborative menu development session," Alexandria announced. "I want everyone who's interested to participate. We're going to spend the evening cooking together, learning from each other, figuring out how to create food that honors both technical excellence and emotional authenticity." Chef Walsh stood up slowly, his expression serious but no longer dismissive. "Ms. Romano, I have to admit, reading these reviews has made me curious about what we might be missing in our current approach. If this Henry Diaz can help us understand how to create food that generates this kind of genuine enthusiasm while maintaining our professional standards, then you're willing to participate in tomorrow's session?" Alexandria asked. "I'm willing to listen and learn," Walsh replied. "But I reserve the right to maintain my professional standards and speak up if I think we're compromising the quality that has built our reputation." Alexandria smiled, recognizing that Walsh's conditional acceptance was probably the best outcome she could have hoped for from her most traditional staff member. As the meeting concluded and staff members filed out discussing the implications of tomorrow's collaboration, Alexandria realized she had successfully navigated the first major hurdle in transforming her restaurant empire. Her team was willing to experiment with Henry's approach, though she suspected their real test would come when they actually worked alongside someone whose understanding of food had been shaped by community needs rather than culinary school curricula. The question now was whether Henry's patient teaching style could bridge the gap between his intuitive approach to cooking and her staff's technical precision, and whether together they could create something that honored both traditions while serving the deeper human need for food that truly nourished both body and soul. The next evening's menu development session transformed Romano's downtown kitchen into something unprecedented, a workspace where formal culinary training met intuitive community cooking, creating tensions and discoveries that would reshape everyone's understanding of their craft. Henry arrived at 6 p.m. carrying 2 worn canvas bags filled with ingredients Alexandria's staff had never seen in their sophisticated kitchen: collard greens with roots still attached, cornmeal ground at a local mill, cast iron skillets seasoned with decades of use, and spice blends that filled the air with aromas suggesting stories and traditions rather than chemical precision. Emma accompanied her father despite Alexandria's initial concern about having a child in a professional kitchen environment, but Henry had insisted that Emma's perspective was essential to understanding the emotional connection between cooking and community care. Chef Walsh approached the evening with the professional skepticism of someone protecting his culinary reputation, while younger staff members like sous chef Patricia Lopez displayed curiosity about techniques that weren't covered in their formal training. "Before we start cooking," Henry announced to the assembled team, "I want everyone to taste something." He unpacked containers of food that had been prepared in his home kitchen, the same dishes that had transformed the Johnson wedding reception. Simple presentations, familiar flavors, but executed with a level of care and understanding that immediately commanded respect from professional cooks. Alexandria watched her staff's reactions as they tasted Henry's mac and cheese, cornbread, and collard greens. The silence that followed wasn't dismissive or polite. It was the thoughtful quiet of professionals recognizing mastery expressed through unfamiliar methods. "This is remarkable," admitted pastry chef Monica Santos, studying Henry's cornbread with the attention she typically reserved for analyzing complex dessert constructions. "The texture is perfect. The flavor balance is sophisticated, but somehow it feels completely accessible and comforting." Henry smiled, clearly accustomed to professional skepticism transforming into genuine appreciation. "The secret isn't complicated techniques. It's understanding what each ingredient contributes emotionally, as well as nutritionally." "What do you mean by emotionally?" asked kitchen manager David Chen. Emma, who had been quietly observing the adult interactions, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had participated in countless cooking conversations. "Dad means that when you cook mac and cheese, you have to think about how it made you feel when someone made it for you when you were little. The cheese has to taste like love, not just like cheese." The simplicity of Emma's explanation seemed to unlock something in the professional kitchen staff. Alexandria noticed several of her cooks nodding with recognition, as if Emma had articulated something they had forgotten about their own relationships with food. "All right," Chef Walsh said, rolling up his sleeves with the determination of someone accepting a professional challenge. "How do we translate that philosophy into restaurant-quality execution at scale?" What followed was the most collaborative cooking session Alexandria had ever witnessed in her restaurants. Henry demonstrated his techniques not as someone trying to prove superiority, but as a teacher sharing knowledge with genuinely interested students. Meanwhile, her professional staff contributed their understanding of flavor chemistry, timing precision, and presentation standards. Sous chef Marcus Rivera worked alongside Henry to develop a version of mac and cheese that maintained the emotional impact of traditional comfort food while incorporating the technical refinements that distinguished restaurant cooking from home preparation. "The roux needs to be perfect," Rivera explained as he whisked butter and flour with mechanical precision. "But you're right that the cheese selection should prioritize flavor harmony over exotic varieties." Henry nodded, adding his own insight. "And the breadcrumb topping should remind people of their childhood, not impress them with ingredients they can't pronounce." Alexandria found herself partnering with Emma to develop cornbread that honored traditional Southern techniques, while meeting the presentation standards her clientele expected. Working with an 8-year-old proved unexpectedly educational. Emma's understanding of flavor balance was intuitive but sophisticated, and her insistence on tasting at every stage kept Alexandria focused on results rather than process. "Ms. Alexandria," Emma said as they adjusted the honey content in their cornbread batter, "you keep checking your phone and looking worried. Cooking isn't supposed to make you anxious." Alexandria realized that Emma was correct. She had been approaching this collaboration as a business problem to solve rather than a creative process to enjoy. When had cooking become a source of stress rather than satisfaction? "You're right, Emma. I think I've forgotten how to cook for pleasure instead of for profit." "Dad says the food always tastes better when you're happy while you're making it," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Maybe that's why restaurant food sometimes tastes sad even when it's fancy." The observation struck Alexandria with the force of recognition. Her restaurants had indeed become places where cooking was treated as technical execution rather than creative expression, where stress and pressure had replaced the joy that originally drew people to culinary careers. Meanwhile, pastry chef Monica Santos was experiencing her own revelation while working with Henry to develop desserts that combined technical sophistication with emotional accessibility. Her background in molecular gastronomy enabled her to create textures and presentations that Henry had never imagined, while his understanding of flavors that triggered memory and comfort guided her toward dessert concepts that served celebration rather than just visual impact. "Henry, what if we took your peach cobbler concept and applied spherification techniques to create components that burst with fresh peach flavor while maintaining the rustic, home-style presentation?" Monica suggested. "I have no idea what spherification means," Henry admitted, "but if it makes the peaches taste more like peaches, I'm interested." As the evening progressed, Alexandria observed something remarkable happening in her kitchen. Professional cooks who had spent years competing for advancement and recognition were collaborating with genuine enthusiasm, teaching and learning from each other without the ego protection that typically characterized restaurant kitchen dynamics. The breakthrough moment came when they plated their collaborative creations for tasting. Each dish maintained Henry's focus on emotional connection, while incorporating the technical precision and visual appeal that distinguished restaurant-quality food. Dr. Richard Sterling, who had been invited to provide objective feedback, tasted each offering with the methodical attention he brought to professional restaurant reviews. His response validated what Alexandria had been hoping to achieve. "This is extraordinary," Sterling announced. "You've managed to create food that satisfies both intellectual and emotional appetites. The technical execution is flawless, but more importantly, these dishes create genuine comfort and satisfaction rather than just admiration." Chef Walsh, who had approached the evening with defensive skepticism, found himself asking Henry detailed questions about spice blending techniques and the emotional psychology of comfort food preparation. "Henry, I need to admit something," Walsh said as they cleaned their stations. "I've spent 15 years learning to create food that impresses other chefs, but I think I'd forgotten how to create food that actually makes people happy. Tonight reminded me why I wanted to become a cook in the first place." As the session concluded, Alexandria realized they had accomplished something unprecedented. They had successfully merged Henry's community-focused approach with her staff's professional expertise, creating food that honored both technical excellence and emotional authenticity. But the real test would come with implementation. Could they translate tonight's collaborative success into sustainable restaurant operations? Could they maintain this level of care and connection when serving hundreds of customers, rather than developing sample dishes for a small group? Henry's final words of the evening addressed exactly the challenge Alexandria was contemplating. The hardest part isn't learning these techniques. It's remembering to cook with care even when you're tired, busy, or dealing with difficult customers. Community cooking works because every meal matters to someone. Restaurant cooking works when you remember that every customer deserves to feel cared for, not just fed. Emma, who had spent the evening observing professional cooks with the fascination of someone glimpsing her potential future, offered her own assessment. "Dad, I think these people are really good at cooking, but they needed to remember that food is supposed to make people smile." As Henry and Emma prepared to leave, Alexandria knew that tomorrow would bring the ultimate test, implementing their collaborative innovations in actual restaurant service, where the pressure of customer satisfaction and operational efficiency would determine whether tonight's breakthrough could survive the realities of commercial food service. The question was no longer whether Henry's approach could coexist with professional kitchen standards, but whether Alexandria and her staff could maintain the emotional connection they had rediscovered while meeting the practical demands of running a successful restaurant operation. The soft opening of Romano's downtown's transformed menu took place on a Thursday evening that would either validate Alexandria's risky gamble or destroy her reputation within Portland's unforgiving culinary community. She had invited a carefully selected group of 50 guests, food critics, restaurant industry colleagues, longtime clients, and community leaders who would determine whether her radical departure from molecular gastronomy could succeed in an upscale dining environment. On cones, Dr. Richard Sterling sat at table 12, his notebook discreetly positioned beside his water glass, ready to document every aspect of an evening that would either celebrate culinary evolution or memorialize professional suicide. At table 8, Victoria Chen observed with the sharp attention of a business partner who had initially opposed this dramatic pivot, but now found her own financial future dependent on its success. Henry stood in the kitchen doorway wearing chef's whites that had been tailored to fit him that afternoon, his calm presence providing stability for a professional staff navigating their first service, using completely reimagined techniques and philosophy. Emma sat at the family table Alexandria had specifically requested, wearing her best dress and serving as an unofficial ambassador for the emotional accessibility that defined their new approach. The evening's first test came with the opening course. Henry's elevated cornbread, served alongside whipped honey butter, infused with local wildflower essence, presented with the visual sophistication Romano's clients expected, but delivering flavors that triggered immediate emotional recognition. Alexandria watched from the pass as servers delivered the cornbread to tables throughout the dining room. The responses were unlike anything she had witnessed during 8 years of operating sophisticated restaurants. Instead of the polite appreciation or analytical discussion that typically accompanied her food, guests were smiling spontaneously, closing their eyes to savor flavors, and engaging in conversations about childhood memories and family traditions. Chef Walsh approached Alexandria with an expression of amazed satisfaction. "The cornbread is generating more genuine enthusiasm than our foie gras amuse-bouche ever did," he reported. Table 6 specifically asked to compliment the chef, and the gentleman at table 15 told his server it reminded him of Sunday dinners at his grandmother's house in Alabama. The mac and cheese course arrived as their collaborative masterpiece. Marcus Rivera's perfectly executed cheese sauce enriched with Henry's understanding of comfort food psychology, topped with breadcrumbs that achieved restaurant-quality presentation while delivering the emotional satisfaction of home-style cooking. Dr. Sterling's reaction provided the validation Alexandria had been desperately hoping for. She watched him take his first bite, pause thoughtfully, then immediately take a second, larger forkful, with the enthusiasm of someone discovering unexpected pleasure rather than analyzing technical execution. But the evening's defining moment came when the collard greens were served. Henry had insisted on preparing this dish personally, understanding that it represented the greatest risk in their menu transformation. Sophisticated diners encountering soul food traditions that many had never experienced or might approach with cultural preconceptions. Alexandria held her breath as she observed the dining room's response to a dish that had traveled from Henry's community kitchen to her upscale restaurant unchanged in its essential character, but elevated through careful presentation and complementary flavors that honored its southern roots while meeting contemporary dining expectations. The silence that followed the first collective taste was broken by spontaneous applause from Table 14, where Portland City Councilwoman Patricia Wright stood up to acknowledge what she described as food that bridges communities through shared appreciation for authentic flavors and cultural traditions. The applause spread throughout the dining room as guests recognized that they were experiencing something unprecedented: restaurant-quality execution applied to comfort food that connected them to broader human experiences rather than just culinary artistry. Victoria Chen approached Alexandria during the height of the evening's success, her expression showing the transformation from skeptical business partner to enthusiastic supporter. "Alexandria, I owe you an apology. The financial projections I was worried about. Look around this room. We have a waiting list of 300 people for next week's reservations, and the profit margins on comfort food ingredients are actually superior to the exotic components we were importing." But the evening's most meaningful validation came from Emma, who had been quietly observing adult reactions to food she helped create. During the dessert course, Monica Santos's spherified peach cobbler that achieved molecular gastronomy sophistication while delivering the emotional comfort of traditional Southern desserts. Emma approached Dr. Sterling's table with the confidence of someone who understood her role as ambassador for accessible excellence. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling," Emma said politely. "Dad wanted me to ask if the dessert tastes like happiness or just like fancy food." Dr. Sterling's response would become part of Portland food industry legend. He set down his spoon, looked directly at Emma, and said, "Young lady, this dessert tastes exactly like the happiness I felt when my own grandmother made peach cobbler, but somehow it's even more delicious than I remembered." The spontaneous standing ovation that erupted throughout the dining room represented more than appreciation for exceptional food. It was recognition that Henry's philosophy had successfully transformed a prestigious restaurant without sacrificing either quality or sophistication. As the evening concluded, Alexandria found herself surrounded by guests who weren't just complimenting the food, but sharing personal stories about family recipes, cultural traditions, and emotional connections to comfort food that transcended economic and social boundaries. James Morrison, owner of 3 competing upscale restaurants, approached Alexandria with professional respect and personal curiosity. "Alexandria, I need to understand what you've accomplished here. This isn't just menu innovation. You've fundamentally changed what fine dining can mean. How do you maintain this level of emotional authenticity when you scale up to full restaurant operations?" Before Alexandria could respond, Henry appeared beside her with the quiet confidence of someone who had always understood that great cooking was about serving people rather than impressing them. "Mr. Morrison," Henry said, "the secret isn't complicated. You just have to remember that every person who sits down at your tables deserves to feel cared for. When you cook with that intention, the technical details take care of themselves." Dr. Sterling's review, published the following morning, captured the significance of what had transpired. "Romano's downtown has achieved something I thought impossible. They have elevated comfort food to fine dining standards while maintaining the emotional accessibility that makes such food meaningful. This represents a paradigm shift that could influence restaurant culture throughout the Pacific Northwest." But the review's most important paragraph addressed the collaboration that had made the transformation possible. Executive Chef Alexandria Romano's partnership with community cook Henry Diaz demonstrates that culinary excellence emerges not from competition between different approaches, but from respectful collaboration that honors both technical mastery and authentic tradition. As Alexandria stood in her kitchen the morning after their successful debut, surrounded by staff members who were already discussing improvements and innovations for upcoming services, she realized that Henry had accomplished something more significant than helping her develop a new menu. He had reminded her entire organization that restaurants existed to nourish communities, not just to showcase culinary artistry. The technical skills her staff had developed over years of training were now being applied to creating experiences that brought people together rather than setting them apart through exclusivity and pretension. The phone calls that morning came from restaurant owners throughout Portland, requesting consultations about implementing similar approaches in their own establishments. Food and Wine magazine wanted to feature their collaboration as a cover story. The James Beard Foundation had inquired about submitting their community-focused dining concept for award consideration. But the recognition that meant most to Alexandria came from Patricia Johnson, whose wedding reception had initiated this entire transformation. Her voicemail, left at 7 a.m., conveyed appreciation that transcended professional success. Alexandria, my grandmother would have been so proud to know that her favorite recipes helped inspire a restaurant where families like mine can experience fine dining that honors our cultural traditions instead of ignoring them. As Alexandria prepared for another evening of service that would build on their debut success, she understood that Henry had taught her something invaluable about leadership. That true innovation came not from rejecting traditional approaches, but from finding ways to honor different forms of expertise while serving the fundamental human need for food that nourished both body and soul. The transformation of Romano's downtown represented more than a successful restaurant pivot. It was proof that bridging cultural and economic divides was possible when people approached each other with genuine respect and shared commitment to excellence that served community rather than just profit. 6 months after their revolutionary debut, Alexandria stood in the construction zone that would become Henry's Haven, a second location designed from the ground up to embody their collaborative philosophy of accessible excellence. Unlike Romano's downtown, which had been retrofitted to accommodate their new approach, Henry's Haven was being built specifically to blur the lines between fine dining and community gathering space. The restaurant's design reflected their shared vision: an open kitchen where guests could observe food preparation, communal tables alongside intimate booths, and a children's play area that acknowledged families as valued customers rather than tolerated disruptions. Most significantly, the space included a community teaching kitchen where Henry would offer cooking classes to neighborhood residents regardless of their economic circumstances. Henry walked through the construction site wearing a hard hat that bore the logo they had developed together. Simple script reading, "Henry's Haven, where food builds family." His evolution from hospital janitor to recognized culinary innovator had been documented by Food Network, featured in Bon Appetit magazine, and studied by culinary schools seeking to understand how traditional comfort food techniques could enhance contemporary restaurant operations. But the transformation that mattered most to Alexandria was evident in Henry's confidence as he discussed kitchen layout specifications with contractors, menu development strategies with food distributors, and staff training protocols with the team they were assembling for their new venture. "Alexandria," Henry said as they reviewed the teaching kitchen plans, "I want to make sure we're thinking about this space correctly. It's not just about offering cooking classes. It's about creating a place where people can learn that good food doesn't require expensive ingredients or complicated techniques." Emma, now 9 years old and serving as unofficial junior consultant on child-friendly restaurant design, looked up from the architectural drawings she had been studying with the seriousness of someone who understood her role in shaping their family's future. "Dad, what about families who can't afford to eat here very often?" Emma asked. "How do we make sure they still feel welcome?" The question reflected conversations they had been having for months about maintaining accessibility while operating a sustainable business. Henry's commitment to community service had never wavered, but scaling their operation required balancing idealistic goals with economic realities. Alexandria had proposed the solution that would define Henry's Haven's mission: a sliding-scale pricing structure that allowed families to pay what they could afford while business diners and special events subsidized community access. Additionally, every month would feature community dinners where neighborhood families could experience their elevated comfort food, regardless of economic circumstances. "Emma, that's exactly why we're including the community dinner program," Alexandria explained. "And the teaching kitchen classes will always be free for neighborhood residents. We want people to learn that they can create this kind of food in their own homes." Dr. Richard Sterling, who had become a regular chronicler of their partnership's evolution, approached with his photographer to document the construction progress for an upcoming article about restaurant industry innovation. His coverage had been instrumental in legitimizing their approach within professional culinary circles that initially questioned whether comfort food could command fine dining respect and pricing. "Henry, Alexandria," Dr. Sterling said, "I want to discuss the broader impact of what you've created. Other cities are now attempting to replicate your model. How do you ensure that the community-focused philosophy survives when other operators try to implement your techniques without understanding your motivations?" Henry paused his review of kitchen equipment specifications to consider Sterling's question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Over the past 6 months, he had received dozens of consultation requests from restaurant owners who wanted to add comfort food elements to their menus without necessarily embracing the community service philosophy that made those elements meaningful. Dr. Sterling, I think the difference is whether you're trying to profit from comfort food or serve people through comfort food, Henry replied. The techniques aren't complicated. Anyone can learn to make good mac and cheese or cornbread. But if you're just using those dishes to attract customers without caring about the communities you're serving, people can taste the difference. Alexandria nodded, remembering her own pre-transformation approach to restaurant operations. We've learned that authenticity can't be faked. Customers know whether they're being nourished or just fed, whether they're valued as community members or treated as revenue sources. The construction site was interrupted by the arrival of Monica Santos, who had left Romano's downtown to become head pastry chef at Henry's Haven. Her decision to join their new venture had surprised industry colleagues who questioned why an accomplished molecular gastronomist would choose comfort food desserts over cutting-edge culinary experimentation. Alexandria, Henry. Monica announced excitedly, "I've just finished testing the final version of Emma's chocolate chip cookies recipe. We've achieved restaurant-quality consistency while maintaining the emotional impact of homemade cookies that remind people of childhood." Emma's face lit up with pride. Over the past months, she had become increasingly involved in recipe development, contributing ideas that professional chefs might overlook, but that children and adults remembering their own childhoods found irresistible. "Can we taste them?" Emma asked, clearly eager to evaluate whether Monica had successfully translated her home kitchen creation into restaurant production standards. As Monica distributed samples of cookies that achieved perfect texture and flavor while maintaining the rustic appearance that suggested care rather than commercial production, Alexandria reflected on how dramatically her understanding of culinary success had evolved. 6 months earlier, she would have evaluated these cookies based on profit margins, presentation innovation, and critical reception. Now she found herself watching Emma's reaction, observing whether the cookies delivered the emotional satisfaction that made food memorable, rather than just consumable. "These taste exactly like the ones we make at home," Emma announced after careful consideration, "but somehow they're even better." Monica smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had learned to measure success through connection rather than just technical achievement. The secret was realizing that restaurant quality doesn't mean more complicated. It means more consistent, more caring, more focused on the experience we're creating for people. Victoria Chen arrived for their scheduled partnership meeting, carrying financial projections that would determine Henry's Haven's official opening timeline. Her conversion from skeptical business partner to enthusiastic advocate had been complete, but she maintained responsibility for ensuring their idealistic goals translated into sustainable operations. "The pre-opening reservations are exceeding our most optimistic projections," Victoria reported. "We have bookings for the first 3 months, and the community dinner waiting list suggests demand that far exceeds our monthly capacity." But Victoria's most significant news concerned franchise inquiries from restaurant operators in Seattle, San Francisco, and Austin, who wanted to implement the Henry's Haven model in their own communities. "We're facing a decision about expansion that could define our long-term impact," Victoria explained. "Multiple operators are offering substantial licensing fees for the right to use our recipes, training protocols, and community service model." Henry's reaction reflected the tension between opportunity and authenticity that had shaped every major decision since their collaboration began. Scaling their approach could bring comfort food accessibility to thousands of families, but it also risked diluting the personal connection that made their restaurant meaningful. "Victoria, what guarantees do we have that franchise operators would maintain the community service aspects rather than just copying our profitable elements?" Henry asked. Alexandria recognized the fundamental challenge they faced: how to share their innovation without losing the intimate, community-focused spirit that made it work. Every successful restaurant faced similar decisions about growth versus authenticity, but their commitment to accessibility complicated traditional expansion models. "I think we need to be very selective about partnerships," Alexandria said. "Maybe instead of traditional franchising, we develop a mentorship program where we train operators who demonstrate genuine commitment to community service, not just profit generation." Emma, who had been quietly listening to the business discussion, offered her own perspective with the clarity that only children bring to complex problems. "Why don't we visit the people who want to copy what we do?" Emma suggested. "If they're nice to kids and cook food that makes people smile, maybe they really understand what Dad's trying to do." The simplicity of Emma's evaluation criteria highlighted the essential question underlying all their expansion decisions: whether potential partners understood that their success came from caring about people rather than just replicating successful techniques. As the afternoon construction meeting concluded, Alexandria realized that Henry's Haven represented more than a new restaurant opening. It was becoming a model for how hospitality businesses could serve communities while maintaining financial sustainability, how professional expertise could be applied to accessible rather than exclusive goals. The phone call that evening from James Beard Foundation representatives requesting a formal interview about their community service innovations confirmed that their approach was influencing culinary culture beyond Portland's restaurant scene. But the recognition that mattered most to Alexandria came from Henry's daily example of leadership that prioritized community impact over personal recognition, authentic connection over impressive credentials, and long-term relationship building over short-term profit maximization. As they prepared for Henry's Haven's grand opening in just 3 weeks, Alexandria understood that their partnership had accomplished something unprecedented, proving that restaurants could succeed financially while serving social purposes, that fine dining could be both sophisticated and accessible, and that the highest form of culinary excellence was food that brought people together rather than setting them apart. 2 years after Henry Diaz first entered Alexandria Romano's world through a desperate catering emergency, the National Restaurant Association's annual conference in Chicago featured their partnership as the keynote presentation to 3,000 industry professionals seeking to understand how community-focused hospitality had transformed from idealistic experiment into proven business model. Alexandria stood at the podium of the McCormick Place Convention Center, looking out at an audience that included restaurant owners, culinary school deans, food critics, and hospitality industry investors who had traveled from across North America to learn about the Romano-Diaz model that was reshaping conversations about restaurant purpose and profitability. Behind her, a massive screen displayed images from Henry's Haven's second anniversary celebration, families from every economic background sharing tables, children learning cooking techniques in the community kitchen, and guests whose faces showed the genuine satisfaction that comes from being nourished rather than just fed. 2 years ago, Alexandria began, I would have told you that restaurant success required choosing between financial sustainability and community service. I believed that sophisticated dining and accessible pricing were mutually exclusive, that professional excellence and emotional authenticity couldn't coexist. She clicked to the next slide, showing before and after photos of Romano's downtown, the sterile elegance of molecular gastronomy replaced by warm spaces where families gathered around food that connected them to tradition and each other. Henry Diaz taught me that those assumptions were not just wrong, they were destructive to everything restaurants should represent. Food service isn't just about feeding people efficiently or impressing them with technical skill. It's about building community, honoring cultural traditions, and remembering that every meal is an opportunity to show people they matter. The audience listened with the focused attention that hospitality professionals reserve for presentations that might fundamentally alter their understanding of their industry. Alexandria noticed several restaurant owners taking detailed notes, culinary school representatives recording the session, and food industry investors leaning forward with expressions that suggested they were reconsidering fundamental assumptions about market positioning and customer relationships. Henry sat in the front row wearing a suit that still looked unfamiliar on his frame, his presence serving as quiet validation that community cooking expertise deserved the same professional respect typically reserved for formally trained chefs. Emma, now 11 and serving as their unofficial youth ambassador, sat beside him with the notebook she used to document ideas for making restaurants more welcoming to families and children. The transformation we've achieved isn't just about menu changes or pricing strategies, Alexandria continued. It's about remembering that restaurants exist to serve communities, not the other way around. When we prioritize authentic connection over artificial exclusivity, when we measure success by community impact rather than just profit margins, we discover that financial sustainability and social responsibility enhance each other. She clicked to financial data that would validate their approach to skeptical business minds, revenue growth that exceeded industry averages, customer retention rates that surpassed luxury dining establishments, and profit margins that proved accessibility didn't require sacrificing sustainability. Henry's Haven and Romano's downtown have demonstrated that community-focused hospitality generates superior business results precisely because it creates genuine value for customers. People return to restaurants where they feel cared for, where their cultural traditions are honored, where their children are welcomed rather than merely tolerated. Dr. Richard Sterling, who had documented their partnership's evolution through dozens of articles and now served on their advisory board, stood to offer commentary that would frame their presentation for industry colleagues who might otherwise dismiss community service as impractical idealism. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, "I've been writing about restaurant innovation for 30 years, and I can state unequivocally that Romano and Diaz have created something unprecedented. They've proven that the highest level of culinary excellence emerges not from competition and exclusivity, but from genuine care for the communities restaurants serve." The presentation's most powerful moment came when Henry stepped forward to address questions about scalability and replication, concerns that reflected the industry's struggle to balance inspiration with implementation. "I understand that many of you are wondering whether our approach can work outside Portland, whether community-focused hospitality can succeed in different markets with different demographics," Henry said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to speak to professional audiences without abandoning the humility that made his cooking authentic. "The answer is that every community has families who deserve to feel welcomed when they dine out, cultural traditions that deserve to be honored rather than ignored, and people who want to feel cared for through food. The specific dishes might change, the cultural influences might vary, but the fundamental human need for connection through shared meals is universal." Emma raised her hand with the fearless directness that had characterized her contributions to their partnership since she was 8 years old. "Can I say something?" Alexandria smiled, recognizing that Emma's perspective often provided clarity that adult analysis missed. "Of course. I think grown-ups make restaurants too complicated," Emma announced to an audience of 3,000 hospitality professionals. "People just want food that tastes good and makes them feel happy. If you cook like you're making dinner for your own family, and you treat customers like they're your neighbors, everything else works out." The spontaneous applause that erupted throughout the convention center reflected recognition that Emma had articulated the essential truth underlying all successful hospitality, that technical expertise and business sophistication should serve human connection rather than replace it. The presentation concluded with announcements that would define their partnership's next phase of growth. 15 restaurant operators across North America had been selected for the Romano-Diaz Mentorship Program, which would provide training in community-focused hospitality while ensuring that expansion maintained authentic commitment to accessibility and cultural respect. Additionally, 3 culinary schools had incorporated their approach into curricula that would teach future chefs to measure success through community impact alongside technical proficiency. The Henry Diaz Community Cooking Institute would open its first satellite location in Detroit, bringing free cooking education to urban neighborhoods where fresh food access remained limited. But the announcement that generated the most enthusiasm concerned the Romano-Diaz Foundation's scholarship program, which would provide culinary education opportunities for young people from communities traditionally underrepresented in professional kitchens. "Our goal," Alexandria explained, "isn't to create more restaurants that look exactly like Henry's Haven. Our goal is to inspire hospitality professionals to remember that food service is fundamentally about caring for people, and that the most successful restaurants are those that strengthen the communities they serve." As the presentation ended and audience members approached with questions, partnership inquiries, and requests for consultation, Alexandria reflected on the journey that had brought them from a desperate catering emergency to national recognition as innovators who had proven that idealism and pragmatism could coexist in restaurant operations. The evening's private reception brought together restaurant owners, food critics, and industry leaders who were implementing their own variations of community-focused hospitality. Stories emerged from Seattle, Austin, Nashville, and Boston about restaurants that had transformed their operations after studying the Romano-Diaz model. But the conversation that meant most to Alexandria came from Maria Santos, a young chef who had attended their culinary school workshops and was now opening her own restaurant in Phoenix, using principles of accessibility and cultural respect that honored her Mexican heritage while serving diverse communities. "Ms. Romano, Mr. Diaz," Maria said, "your example taught me that I don't have to choose between honoring my grandmother's recipes and running a professional kitchen. I can use my culinary education to elevate traditional dishes while maintaining the emotional connection that makes them meaningful to my community." Henry's response reflected the satisfaction of someone who had always understood that teaching others was the highest form of success. "Maria, that's exactly what we hoped would happen. When restaurants honor cultural traditions while providing excellent service, everyone benefits. Families feel welcomed, communities are strengthened, and businesses thrive because they're serving genuine needs." As the evening concluded, Alexandria, Henry, and Emma walked through Chicago's downtown, past restaurants that represented every level of the hospitality spectrum, from fast food to fine dining. The city's diverse food scene reminded them that their approach was just one model among many, but it was a model that had proven food service could strengthen communities while building sustainable businesses. "Dad," Emma said as they paused outside a family restaurant where multiple generations were sharing dinner together, "do you think all restaurants will eventually cook the way we do?" Henry considered his daughter's question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I don't think all restaurants need to look exactly like ours, Emma, but I hope more restaurants will remember that their most important job is making people feel cared for through food." Alexandria watched families through the restaurant's windows, children laughing with grandparents, parents sharing stories over meals that clearly meant more than just nutrition, servers who treated guests like neighbors rather than transactions. "You know what I've learned?" Alexandria said. "The most successful restaurants aren't the ones with the most impressive credentials or the highest prices. They're the ones that understand food is a language of love, and that the best hospitality comes from genuinely caring about the people you serve." 2 years after a broken catering contract had brought them together, Alexandria Romano and Henry Diaz had created more than successful restaurants. They had demonstrated that business success and community service were not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing when approached with authentic commitment to caring for people through food. Their partnership had proven that the most powerful innovation in hospitality wasn't new cooking techniques or sophisticated presentations, but remembering the fundamental truth that had always defined great restaurants: that food prepared and served with genuine care has the power to bring people together, honor cultural traditions, and strengthen the communities that sustain us all. As they returned to their hotel, planning for another day of presentations and consultations, Alexandria realized that Henry had taught her the most valuable lesson of her career: that true culinary excellence wasn't about impressing people with what you knew, but about showing them how much you cared through every meal you served. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.